Yeah, we're live. We're live.
Okay, this is a Content Over Everything interview with Michael Roberts, the famed, infamous Marxist city economist, whose writings, whose blog, the next Over Everything interview with Michael Roberts. I'm playing back to myself. What's that about?
Oh, that was me. Sorry, I'm gonna mute my mic.
Okay, he's been writing a blog for a number of years called The Next Recession .wordpress.com, I believe it is. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
And have been writing on Marxist economics and economics in general for decades. And today we're going to start with a discussion about the new Facebook cryptocurrency of sorts that they're proposing to launch next year. And I'm going to ask some kind of basic questions as well as try and get into the beef of Michael's been kind enough to write an article yesterday on the subject matter. He seems to knock them out by the dozen every week. So we've got a framework to talk about the issue. And then perhaps others can come in on. I know there's a lot of discussion at Speaker's Corner and elsewhere about what money is. You know, I think we need to go to some quite basic questions here as well, so people can discuss philosophically about these questions. So perhaps we can start with that. You know, what is money, first of all, and what's the difference between normal money and what Facebook's proposing?
Good question, Heiko, and good afternoon, evening to everybody, and you and the viewers, if there are any, hopefully. Money, very good question. Well, it's an easy answer because if you think about it, money is a commodity, a thing. It could be a metallic piece of gold or silver or a coin or something else, which everybody agrees can be exchanged for goods or services that people want. So it's acceptable by everybody. It's a universal means of exchange. And that what money is in physical terms can vary. Going way back to prehistoric times, it could be cowrie shells, it could be stones, it could be various forms of iron ore. Eventually, the one that was most often used was either silver or gold as a means of exchange. And the reason was that silver and gold doesn't perish easily. It's not like a piece of bread that goes off. You can keep it for a very long time and store it and therefore maintain, hopefully, the value of that for purchasing goods and other services. So money also is not only an actual universal means of exchange, it's also a store of value. It has to have ability to store value when you don't want to buy anything, when you just want to save or wait before you make a purchase, or you're waiting perhaps to, if you're going to sell something, then when that money may come through in the form of credit, so it takes a little bit of time, so you want to store a value. And then the third thing, of course, is you must be able to measure how much it's worth. How much is 1 ounce of gold worth for a commodity? So can you get 10 pairs of shoes for an ounce of gold, or can you get 20 pairs of shoes for an ounce of gold? So there has to be a sort of unit of measure of that money. So those three key things make up money. And they, as I say, over the history of human beings, that's changed in what that form takes. Up until probably just 150 years ago, maybe a little longer, the only real form of money was gold. Actually, gold coins, silver coins to some extent, and gold bars and bullions that people would keep in banks and deposits. But as we expanded, as the economies of the world expanded and production expanded, there isn't enough gold in the world to match all the amount of money that people need. So what tended to happen was that we moved on to actually producing paper money and notes that we still have, whether it's in dollars, euros, pounds, yen. So we had paper money. Now that paper money wasn't worth the same amount in weight as gold, and therefore, but was representing a certain amount of gold on it, or the money commodity that existed before. And people accepted paper money over a period of time to exchange to buy things and services. And in the more recent period, with the development of the banking system and people keeping their money in banks, we no longer even use coin or notes to make transactions. In modern economies now, we simply make a bank transfer. We have a credit account, we have a deposit account, we have accounts with banks. It's all digital. We just make a transfer on the bank, or we make a transfer on our credit card, and the money gets transferred to somebody else, and we get a service sent to us by Amazon or something, and we have the products or the service, and a transfer has been made in the bank account. But now, for the last technical innovation, is that we've moved to the position where we could make transfers digitally on what money we have. We can make money transfers and exchanges digitally without using a bank. That's the big development that's now being offered to us in a digital currency, so that we make that transaction, and through a process of a new technological innovation, a new coding system, which is called blockchain, we can make that transfer by both carrying out a certain coding process, which somebody does for us, miners they're called, and that these processes take place, which means it guarantees that the transfer has been done. We don't need an intermediary like a bank saying that we've made the transfer. At the moment, most of us get our wages if we're working, or make a payment in the bank. We can look on our accounts and we can see the bank confirms that the transfer has been made either to us or to somebody else. In future, if you use this decentralized form of digital transfer, then there will be no bank account for it. It will simply make a transfer, and you will be confirmed that the transfer has been made by this process of a coding process. And it will be guaranteed that it's been carried out, because the trust of hundreds of thousands of people operating on this system will produce the transfer. So we're moving to what is called a possibility, anyway, of the digital currency. So Heiko, the days of gold no longer are the main transfers of money. The days of notes and coins are beginning to disappear. The level of the share of notes and coins in total money supply in the world now is a rapidly falling proportion of total money supply, except in areas where we don't have very good banking systems, and where people are still not able to make transfers on their mobiles and so on. Still, notes and cash coins continue at a certain level. But that is the new development. That's why money is changing in its nature. But the essence of money is it must be universally accepted to be exchanged for goods and services. It must have a certain value that can be sustained. If it collapses in value, we won't want to use it. So the Zimbabwean currency collapsed, so everybody wants to use something else. Or in Germany in the 1920s, the German mark collapsed, so everybody uses cigarettes or something else. But generally, the currency must hold a value, and we must be able to judge how much that currency is worth in terms of what goods and services we can buy. So it can't inflate away or deflate away at huge amounts. So that's the essence of what we mean by money.
Okay, so the control over money then becomes the question: who controls the money? Is it just an arbitrary thing that emerges spontaneously, or is it something controlled and contrived?
Well, there's a difference of opinion amongst economists, anyway, about whether money is something which came about because of the need for people to exchange commodities and services in a most efficient way, rather than just bartering. If back in the days you could say, I want 1 cow, for 1 cow I want 3 sheep, just transferring the 2 physical commodities as an exchange process. It would be better if we had something very easy to hold, that didn't perish, that we could keep in our pockets or in a house. And so we had to look for something that was a medium between those 2 exchanges of things, as I say, gold, silver, and eventually otherwise. So that one set of economists would say that's how money came about, this ease of, in the process of increasing amount of exchange of commodities, they developed the idea of a money. Now, other people, and it's a more modern theory, is that actually money came about because the state controlled money. Once we started having governments who were wanting to impose taxes upon people or to borrow money from their citizens, then they were the ones who developed money, controlled the money system, controlled the nature of that money, and the king or the monarch or the emperor and the state would issue money in form of gold or silver coins, and that they controlled it. And it wasn't really to do with exchange, it was to do with the state wanting to tax people and to borrow money from them to raise debt. These are two differing opinions about where money came from. Historically, there continues to be an argument. In my view, it is really, money really comes from this process of exchange, and that the state obviously plays an important role now in controlling the money supply. So there's only one, we have US dollars. Not everybody can go and print US dollars. You get arrested if you try to print US dollars. They have to be printed by the government under the control of the central bank, and they issue dollar notes, they issue credits to the banks or reserves to the banks. So the dollars are under the control of the state now. And that's generally the position of most currencies, that are under control of the state. But not all currencies have been always under the control of the state. They have developed in a, if you like, in a private way in a certain area without state control historically. So the two ways of producing currency, either directly by the state issuing them, or groups of people or companies or communities developing a currency that they use to exchange between each other without any state control, has also existed. But a fundamental reason for money has been the means of exchange and a store of value, and that isn't necessarily the same role that the state sees for money.
Okay, if different agencies can produce these stores of value, these currencies, what determines the value of the currency itself? I mean, with gold, it's quite clear. You've got £1 of gold or £1 of silver against a piece of paper. So what determines it in the event of it being more arbitrary, more openly released? For example, private agencies are releasing it.
Well, of course, if private agencies release it, then they have to be able to achieve a certain level of trust on the people who are using their private money to buy things and services. The key to the value of a currency and the money is whether people trust its value and prepared to buy or be able to purchase a certain amount of goods and things with a certain amount of money. So when we take the dollar, for example, which the state produces, we have a value of the dollar. The value of the dollar is only measured in other currencies' value. So the value of the dollar is never measured in how many euros or how many yen or how many pounds you can exchange for it, or in the case of within the United States economy, how many cars do you get for $10,000? How many widgets do you get for $5,000? These are the measures. Now, it's the money. That value is actually determined by the process of production going on in the economies of all these countries. So it takes, and this has been a big discussion amongst economists. So how do you measure the value then of these commodities, and therefore how much the money is worth in relation to those commodities? And the answer, generally speaking, the most efficient and most clear answer is how long does it take to produce a commodity on average, given the average technology you've got and the number of workers you're involving and how many hours you make them work. How long does it take, for example, to produce a motor car as opposed to a hairpin? Now, a motor car might cost $15,000. A hairpin costs 1 cent or 1 penny. Obviously, you can produce a lot of hairpins in the same time it takes to produce one car. And that's really the explanation of why a car is $15,000 or pounds and a hairpin is only 1 penny, because car has a lot more labor time going into it, both the labor time that workers actually assembling the car are involved in, but the amount of time it takes to get the raw materials and the components there, to build the factory, all those hours of time taken to put in to produce the factory and get the car produced means that each unit of car produced has a certain value, and we can measure that in dollars or in euros or in yen. That, how many dollars it takes to buy a car may vary from how many euros it takes to buy a car, partly depending on how long it takes to buy a car, to produce a car in Europe using euros, but also to do with the fact that the dollars and the yens and the euros are not now controlled just by the production amount of hours involved. They're moving around all the time because people are buying and selling and using different amounts or demanding different amounts of dollars or yen. And that's changing the price of the dollar in relation to yen or in relation to gold even on a daily basis. If you go and read your newspapers, you go online and look at the markets, as they're called, and you look at the currency markets, you can see that the value of different currencies is changing all the time in relation to each other. But underlying that, there's a general value being set by the amount of time it takes to produce all the commodities that you want to buy with those currencies. So there's an argument though amongst economists whether that's how you look at it. And this argument continues. How do you know why a dollar is worth so much? Economists have spent the last 200 years arguing that question, but I've given you briefly how I see it.
Okay, so just a quick question. It's almost a side question that will come on to the next one about Facebook, and that is, then why is no currency measured by labor time?
Well, a currency is the price or the relation to each other. It's measuring a different currency with another currency, but money as a whole, the value of say 1 ounce of gold must be on the whole measured by the average labor time of products that you can buy with that ounce of gold. So there is an average value of money globally, if you like, but it's moving around all the time between different countries because different countries have different levels of production and they also have different demands for their currencies. So within all the big up and downs that are going on between currencies, there is an underlying process of the average labor time involved in producing all the commodities that you want to buy. And that actually sets, if you like, money represents that value, so that the value of $1 is representing the amount of labor time it goes to produce the commodities that you can use with $1.
Okay, perhaps we'll come back to that a bit later on. So Facebook, their Libra, their currency that they're trying to release, what are they suggesting? What are they proposing?
Okay, well, they're telling us that what they're going to do is they're going to produce a currency they call Libra, which is an old Latin term for the weight of a unit, like gold. So they're using that term. And this Libra currency will mean that if you're on Facebook and you get an advertisement, Facebook's advertising, you want to buy something, whatever it is, I don't know, a track from the latest album that you've heard at Glastonbury, then and it's going to cost you, at the moment, you would have to pay whatever it is in pounds or in dollars, and you'd have to issue that through the bank. Now they're going to issue, you're going to say, you can buy this with Libras. You can buy Libras from us, and you can stock them up in a wallet. And when you want to buy things on the Facebook that you see, or we're arranging a whole range of companies that will take Libra. And so basically you can use Libra rather than pounds or dollars, and you can use it. And also if you want to make a transfer to your friend in Australia or Nigeria, and both of you are on Facebook and both of you got a Libra wallet, you can make a transfer of money hardly with any cost at all immediately to your friend in Nigeria. So if you want to send them 10,000 Libras, they get it straight away. You don't go through a bank. It's automatically transferred using this blockchain technology I was telling you about, and they've got the 10,000 Libra. Now, question is, that would mean that, and the Facebook is saying, look, there are 2 billion of our users who don't have bank accounts, and they won't need any bank accounts now. They can get transfers of money. They can buy things by going through Facebook and having a Libra wallet with Libra in it. And that way you can bypass the banks and you can open up the possibilities of getting things and getting transfers internationally, instantly across the board.
So they could set like a price for Spotify, for example, instead of paying £10 a month, they could put a price that's slightly lower than that to encourage everybody to move into Libra. Is that?
Yeah, they could. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, what can we trust that Libra keeps its value? Well, Facebook says, well, Libra will be valued by taking, what we're going to do is base it on a basket of currencies. So it's going to be worth, Libra is going to be worth a basket of dollars, euros, yen, pounds, and Swiss francs, 5 currencies. And whatever the value of those 5 currencies are, we're going to have a sort of merging together. So you come up with a sort of coordinated value in a basket, and that's the value of Libra. So if tomorrow the dollar goes down 20%, but the euro goes up 20%, Libra's value doesn't change because we've set a ratio for those 5 currencies, and Libra holds its value. Its Libra is now worth more. If the dollar goes down 20% against other currencies, Libra is now also worth more that compared to a dollar. So the idea is to make the Libra a reasonably stable currency that you can use.
And presumably have to be adjusted as well according to...
Yeah, so if all the 5 currencies change and the value, they're always moving around, and the ratios of the 5 currencies, so Libra's value is changing all the time. But the argument is that Libra's value will not change dramatically and sharply and volatilely if you just relied on one currency. If Libra was tied to gold, then basically it would move with the value of gold, which can be quite volatile. If Libra was just tied to one currency, then it could be very volatile. But if we make a basket of 5 currencies, then it's okay. The other aspect of it is that you'll be able to buy things from loads of companies which are going to be prepared to accept Libra as a currency. So if you want to buy, by the way, it's interestingly that Facebook's possible rivals like Amazon and Google will not be involved in this. So they won't be taking Libra, but loads of big companies might take Libra rather than a dollar or a pound or a euro. So this is the basis of the Facebook message that it's going to be offering to you next year. Now, there are a number of problems with this, and that's what we ought to discuss. The first thing is that basically this is cutting out the banks. It's cutting out the banks, and it's opening up the possibility that Facebook would replace become the major currency in the world. It could be in this situation. If you think of it on a very, some people have said to me, well, this is not possible. Libra is really like if you go to the cinema and you've got to leave your bag in the cloakroom, you get a token. And when you go back, you give the token to the guy in the cloakroom and you get your bag back. Mm-hmm. So it's merely a token of switching between a bag, and it doesn't apply to the rest of the world. That's true. It is a token system in a way. It's saying that we're having Libra tokens to buy things. And as long as everybody has got Libra tokens and things that they're prepared to offer you with Libra tokens, then it's a sort of little club system with tokens, and you can move it around. It doesn't affect the rest of the world. But that's not how it's going to stay, because the policy, Facebook will be saying, basically, we've got a currency for 2.5 billion people who haven't got a bank account and only hold currencies in notes, perhaps their own currency. Now they'll be able to do kinds of international transactions without using a bank. And so we'll become a major currency. And here's the other thing, Heike. If you buy, say, you use your pounds and you buy 100 Libras, because you have to kick off somehow, you've got your 100 Libras and you keep it in your Libra wallet, which of course is an online wallet in your computer, in your Facebook site or whatever account. And you don't spend it straight away. And there are billions of people with 100 Libras in their accounts not spending it. What's happening to the Libra? What's happening to the Libra is Facebook's backers, and they've got all these big companies backing them up with equity finance, with stock market finance, can use this to go and buy various certificates of deposit and other credit instruments to earn interest. So they can earn interest on your Libra because you're not using it, and they keep the interest. Right. You don't get it. So if you put a deposit in a bank and you put it in the savings deposit, you get an interest on it. If you keep it there for whatever time, it could be an instant account, in which case you can take it out straight away, but you earn a bit of interest. With Libra, if you have a Libra wallet, you get no interest at all, and the backers of Libra will be making all the interest. They say because they've got the costs involved, a transaction and all the rest of it, but they're going to be getting quite a lot of money, particularly if interest rates start rising. Then they'll be making a lot of money out of you. We call that in economic terms seigniorage. It's a big word. It means that the controller of the currency, which is Facebook, Libra, can actually make money because they actually issue the currency. You can't do anything with it unless they issue the currency. They've got the currency. If you leave it with them, they're going to make interest on it as well. But that means they're buying. How are they getting interest? Because now they're buying dollars, buying euro instruments with their Libra. They're transferring it. The companies that are taking it, and then going to buy dollars and making interest. So all of a sudden, Libra is not just a token system. It's actually entering the whole international credit system and becoming part of the process of expanding credit. And this is all without regulation. The governments and the central banks of the world have no control over this, at least not at the moment. They're dead worried that about this, so they're already thinking about trying to regulate Facebook. Facebook says we will cooperate with all the regulatory authorities. But the implication here, if it kicks off beyond just being a little private token system to a massive multi-billion user currency, where the backers of the system are also making interest by investing in credit instruments around the world, we have a whole new credit bubble potential and crash that is developed by the system.
Well, and is there not a danger then that this would take over as the dominant currency in the world? In other words, like if the US dollar is not as stable, or people don't trust the US dollar, they shift their money into Libra. Obviously, it's a lot easier if you're more logical as well. If you're got the Turkish currency or the Nigerian currency or the Venezuelan currency, chuck it into that. So is there not the danger that, is it not really this sort of contrast between globalization process, which has sort of been halted politically, and the national interest, if you like?
Well, there are differing opinions on this. Some people say this will never take off the ground and that people will never trust a private currency like Libra, particularly if it's controlled by a previous company like Facebook, which has already been fiddling with people's data and all the rest of it. Can we really trust Zuckerberg to look after our money if we allowed him to? So there's one angle on that it's not really going to take off. People prefer to trust the dollar. And also, if there's a connection between the ordinary national currencies and Libra through the system I just described of buying, then in a way, Libra is already facing the same sort of frailties and difficulties and flaws that can happen if it takes off. So that there are two angles. It could take off, and suddenly a private tech company has a bigger currency, or as big a currency as the national currencies recognized and supported by the state, or it could just remain a small token club thing like, I don't know, PayPal points or Avios points in your BA flights, if you've got them out there, viewers. If you take a BA flight, you get Avios points, which means you can reduce the value of the price of the next flight you take. So that's like a coupon system. Maybe it would stay like that, and it would just make it cheaper for you to buy goods because you've got some Libra. But that's not how Facebook see it. They see it as an international means of payment. So we can, so instead of taking your money to the Western Union and writing a check and getting the money sent to Nigeria, you can just press a button on your computer through using your Facebook Libra, and it's transferred straight away. And also, maybe it will move on to actually offering services like ordinary financial services. So there's a split of opinion. We don't know how it's going to go. But the interesting thing is, some people say Facebook is doing this because it's losing money now. It's not making any profits out of it. It's losing users. It's not making so much money out of advertising. It needs a new way forward. Facebook's saying it's doing it for the benefit of us all, to provide an international service through its users. You can take your pick on that view. And we don't know whether it's just going to stay as a small coupon club or whether it's going to expand into a great Frankenstein of private currency and credit.
Mm-hmm. And do you think they've done this without the knowledge or behind the backs of the national government of the United States? I mean, for example, you mentioned in your article that Alipay and a couple of there's two Chinese WeChat, two Chinese type of cryptocurrencies, effectively, where they pay on, they pay basic. I mean, even a beggar in China gets their money from a mobile phone nowadays. You get breakfast in China, you bleep by that, and you're done. Is it a competition with the Chinese, or is it?
Well, this is going further. WeChat stuff is basically saying you use your Chinese renminbi and you've got your bank account, and so you go through WeChat and you make the payment.
Right.
So you still have a bank account.
Right.
This is saying no bank account. It's just Libra money it's an account in your wallet in Facebook. So it's decentralized, taking the bank out.
Right.
The next, but it's a private currency. It's not like what is now called cryptocurrencies, which are international currencies that are not private. They have no government control. They have no private control. Bitcoin, for example, is purely its value is done by the people speculating in Bitcoin, but also the production of Bitcoin is purely, and the transactions that take place using Bitcoin are using a completely decentralized process. So there's no one company with one currency. Bitcoin is supposedly an international currency, but that is why Bitcoin is a tiny currency. It has nearly no impact upon the world range of currencies, and it's not really an effective means of payment, because the current price of Bitcoin, which varies volatilely every day, is say $11,000 per Bitcoin, and the next day it's $5,000 per Bitcoin. You can't conduct international transactions with a currency that moves around like that, and you can't really store its value because it's moving around. But it is an international currency, unlike this proposal from Facebook, which will be a private digital currency. Both are digital currencies. One is international and decentralized, a cryptocurrency, which is where transactions are achieved by encryption process through this technology.
Yeah.
And Facebook is a private currency, which is apparently going to use the same encryption process, but it's a currency which is fixed by this basket of currencies which Facebook has worked out for it. So, so they're two different things.
Yeah. And there's a lot of talk over the last years. I don't know the details of how this exactly works, but a lot of people talked about the Federal Reserve being run by 14 private banks. So what would be the difference there? Is that the case, that the Federal Reserve is effectively a private institution, or what's the relationship between that and state?
Legally, the Federal Reserve was set up in the early part of the 20th century after some problems with banking system where they didn't really have any, in the economics phrase, it's the lender of last resort. When they had a panic and banks started to go under, they didn't have anybody they could borrow money of as a last resort. The state couldn't provide them with extra funds so that they could survive, like we did in the great global financial crash in 2008. They had got a load of money from a lender of last resort, which was the Federal Reserve Bank. And so they set up the Federal Reserve Bank because they didn't want this crash again. And the way they set it up was, as you say, the 12 main banks in the United States formed the Federal Reserve, and they legally are the owners of the Federal Reserve. But it's only a legal piece of paper, because if the Federal Reserve, if JP Morgan said we don't want the Federal Reserve to do something, that would not happen. The government is the United States, and the Federal Reserve Board, which is mainly appointed by the governments of the United States, is in control of what the Federal Reserve does, either in generating money or in handing out credit to various banks and institutions, and that the official private owners of it not really in control. It's a bit, the Bank of England had a similar development when it first started, although it became a nationalized federal bank, if you like, a central bank. So most central banks are owned by and controlled by the government. It's just as it were, a quirk of history that the Federal Reserve isn't.
Okay. What else have I got then? Not that much, actually. I think we should move over to Leon and see what the audience have said, if there's anyone there. Leon, was he gone away for a sleep? He's not around at the moment. He's gone for a break.
He's had enough of this.
He's gone for a break. No, there you are. Leon.
Right, but can you hear me?
Yeah,
we can hear you. Iko's run out of questions.
I've run out of questions for now. I've filled my page and asked the questions, and
yeah, my computer's moving slow because I'm encoding in the background.
Okay.
Yeah. Wait, yeah, the comments are there on the side. You know what? Let me go through them.
I don't see group chat. Is it? I've got to click on that or what? I don't see.
Nah, if you go to the link that I sent you for the
yeah for the
YouTube video.
Yeah.
And people just
I see them
say
too.
they like the stream. Boy, you know what it is right now. Obviously, I don't know if you was watching all the drama at Speaker's Corner. I think you left before it happened still.
Oh, I saw it. I left just after it happened. I didn't cause any of it.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are online now discussing
that.
all of the drama in it. So
yeah, well, that's understandable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the finance is dead, Heiko.
Huh? No, don't worry. It remains online, and lots of people watch it all the time. But there was a bit of ructions and fighting at Speaker's Corner yesterday. So
right.
Okay. And it's the gang who are following that type of thing who tend to come on here when it's live and start discussing. So it's not a worry.
So shall we call it a day, or is
it? I think so. Unless Leon's got something he wants to ask. I wanted to go back to the one question though, because that was one thing that I was concerned with when I was looking at the issue about socialism, capitalism, and China and that sort of thing, and that was that issue about, because Marx suggested, or at least Preobrazhensky says, Marx suggested that money should be replaced by chips for labor time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how would that? Is that process really considered within Marxist circles to be a real alternative to the system, at least in a transition, or how would you envisage that given modern circumstances?
Well, this would only possibly be to be introduced once you've reached the stage of a planned economy and you've done away with the vast bulk of production for profit and therefore exchange for selling on a market. So when the market is being reduced to a minimal size and you're producing things more directly for need, and even in some cases for free, so that you're free at the point of use, in that position, then the question of if you could start to introduce the idea that people would, depending on how many hours of work they put in on average, then they would receive the equivalent amount of chips, if you want to call them, or coupons or Avios points to make their purchases. So in effect, what we're saying here is that would only work if the process of exchange had begun to disappear, the market process had begun to disappear. So it couldn't be introduced straight away, in my view. It would be a process in the transition period.
Okay, I think we should come back to that as a separate thing, actually. I don't think I should have brought it in. But the issue about Facebook, what can be done about them? I saw you suggested the idea of sort of nationalizing Facebook or something like that.
Well, I think what we're moving, the technology has moved to the point where we now have digital currencies. That's the point. So we don't, in a way, we have digital currencies because everything is, you can do your online banking, so it's digital. You can do it on your phone, so it's digital. So we have digital currency. And now we're moving to the idea of possibly either privatized digital currencies using a system which excludes the banks, or completely decentralized digital currencies like Bitcoin, which again excludes the banks. So the third party, the intermediary, is the technology is there to doing away with balance sheets and banks, and the process of exchange would take place on a decentralized basis using a technology which everybody trusts and the coding is secure. So the argument goes. So we can now have a digital currency that is international without banks. But that raises two issues. Under capitalism, it could mean that it gets privatized, like Facebook is attempting to do. So you have big high-tech monopoly companies controlling a digital currency. Or, alternatively, on a social system, we could move to the view where we have public digital currency and everybody carries out their transactions without banks, but with the support and backing of a planned economy in the state.
Okay, and what about just one final thing now, maybe final. When Maduro tried to launch a digital or a currency backed by oil, I mean, would that be an alternative method of organizing these new types of currencies? Yeah,
that's an example of an attempt to actually have, as it were, a state digital currency, excluding the banks. He was saying, look, people use this currency, the digital bolivar, it's backed by oil, so you can trust it to the level of the price of oil and how much oil we've got. You don't have to go through the banking system controlled by American banks. And we can use this, and if you do that, then as it were, we're getting the backing, the savings and the support of the people directly and avoiding the banks. But of course, it never really got off the ground.
Okay, anything else you want to add, Leon, or should we call it a halt?
Yeah, you got when I was in Speaker's Corner, I was asking people questions about money, and I can't remember who exactly it was I was talking to, but there was like the countries that, like America had a list of countries that they said is, I don't know if it's the axis of evil or something like that.
Right.
And basically it was all the countries that don't run by a fiat currency banking system. And the countries that's no longer on those lists are the ones that's been invaded and had that system set up. So I don't know if you can speak anything on that, if you know anything about that, how true that is.
Well, it's part of the process of imperialist control by the big capitalist countries in the United States, Europe, and so on. And it's these very poor, weak countries with weak currencies, which are in a difficult position when people don't have even also decent banking systems. They're under a really difficulty, and their currencies are not valued. So that people tend to search for an alternative currency, like they want to hold everything in dollars. There's lots of countries around the world that, and it was the case with the countries which were occupied, like Afghanistan and others, where it's dollarized, if you like. Some in Latin America, where they've got their own currency, but nobody wants it. They want to hold dollars because they feel more secure that that's worth something. Therefore, their own currency is very weak. The Venezuelan bolivar will be an example now. So what you've got there then is the attempt, really, people don't have a currency which they've got some sort of control over, because the control is actually being exerted by those who've got the strong currencies and the strong economies. It's part of the imperialist process, which has weakened the ability of people to have any control over their currency, and therefore over the value of the commodities that would represent.
Okay. So in that case, then whoever controls the dollar has major influence all over the world.
Absolutely, yeah. And who controls the dollar? American imperialism on the whole.
Can it be like specified to a certain set of people though? Like
yeah, it can. It can be specified to the people that are the major companies in that country that employ most of the people and make most of the investments, and also control and influence the state and the central banks, which control the production of the dollar and its issuance, and to some extent fix all the controls and taxation. It's all involved. All the process of taxing big companies, of what rights you've got to move currencies across the border. All these things are decided by the state, and that state, in the case of the United States, is basically under the influence and control of the big companies and monopolies and banks in that country. So the dollar is controlled by big capital.
Those companies, are they they're international companies, don't it? Like,
yeah,
they're not necessarily bound by the rules of American government.
No, they're not entirely bound by that. They're hiding their money in tax havens illegally and all the rest of it, and they can move their money around by changing the price of goods in different countries so that their profits can be held at least on bank accounts in different places. But obviously the government has some sort of attempts to make some sort of control over them, and also they're prepared to accept certain measures of control if it means that the American government will provide them with troops and other things to ensure that their assets abroad are sustained. So there is a quid pro quo here. There is a bargaining between the American government and the military to preserve the interests of big companies. So in that case, the big companies must keep to certain government rules and taxation rules insofar as they do. Then it's a working agreement between the big companies and big government.
How did the whole fiat banking system come into play in the first place? I don't know.
Well, because what happened was we found that as capitalism developed globally across the world, it was impossible to just rely upon metallic money like gold or silver. There's just not enough produced. So it would mean that the price value, there wouldn't be enough money going around. It'd begin to restrict the ability to produce things because it would drive up the level of prices in relation to each commodity. Commodity will become very expensive because gold will be weak. So there'll be a tremendous downward pressure on production. So it would better to allow the expansion of something which people could still trust if the government issued it and said, look, you don't need you don't need a pound of gold anymore. You can have $100 or whatever. We'll fix the price of dollars to gold. That's what happened to begin with. So you get so many dollars, which it represents a certain amount of gold. So you can just trust it. And these dollars are in notes or in coins. So that there was an expansion of what is called notes and coins, which is fiat money. So it's been decided by the state, the value of that gold by fiat, by decision, the value of that dollar in relation to an amount of gold originally. Used to be tied to gold, a gold standard.
I heard it was like it was bankers that came together and set that system up, and initially they had to like sneak it into government. Like it wouldn't have got passed in the Senate or something like that.
Well, I think this is the argument of the conspiracy theory to do with the Federal Reserve. Yeah, which a lot of the argument is that the Federal Reserve is really an organization controlled by the 12 big banks, and the Federal Reserve is really a conspiracy run by the 12 big banks. I don't really accept that as a conspiracy theory. I think it was a necessary measure that the 12 big banks took, and they can officially they are the owners of the federal bank, the Federal Reserve Bank in the US. But it's designed to meet the needs of capitalism as a whole and big capital as a whole, and therefore it takes the interests of everybody. Insofar, the banks have a lot of say in it, but the central bank and its reserve board is really under the policy control on the whole of the US government. The US government, of course, represents the whole of capital, not just 12 banks.
Okay. All right.
We can return to these themes another time. I'm sure there'll be comments in the chat, comments coming in a bit later on the YouTube video. Thanks very much, Michael, for coming along. Thanks, Leon, for laying it all out for us.
No problem.
All right.
Thank God we got
See
it
you guys.
this time. See you later. Yeah.
See you later. All right. Peace.
Ta-da.